So with that, I'll turn it over to Irene to talk about the Latino Climate Justice Framework.
Thank you so much, Dharma. Eder, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we have kind of an exciting little overview to give of the Latino Climate Justice Framework, or LCJF for short. This is a project that we just recently launched for Hispanic Heritage Month, with the help and collaboration of many of you on this call and so many partners. Eder, if you can go to the next slide, please. Oh, yes. So what is the Latino Climate Justice Framework, or LCJF? So LCJF is a framework for addressing the climate crisis. It's unique from other climate frameworks out there in that it focuses on the particular impacts of Latina communities, and it proposes policy solutions to address Latina-centered issues surrounding the climate crisis. So ultimately, the LCJF is a tool that Latinos across the country can use to advocate for climate solutions at the local, state, and federal levels. So you can see on the right-hand side, there's a photo of us in Washington, D.C. from this past October, where we launched our LCJF with a great panel and with an exciting kind of opportunity where we're joined by a variety of different members, about 20 members, and advocated for a variety of different LCJF priorities with congressional offices. And so that was like our little power stance outside of the White House. Next slide, Eder. So how was the LCJF created? This is a little bit of the timeline. It's all started with 22 original signatories that really came together to identify that there was a need for a Latina-focused framework addressing our disproportionate issues. So together, back in October, over a year ago now, we co-developed the policy priorities. And then really over a year-long process, co-created with our partners and collaborators, the content of LCJF. And so you can see from December to April, we held a variety of workshop sessions to develop that content, then launched a writing and review process for LCJF from May to July, completed the first drafts that were then circulated around August and September, with a variety of reviewers and partners and collaborators, and then completed the final draft and launched it in October of 2022 in time for Hispanic Heritage Month. And then I also just wanted to give a big shout out to our partners, Climate Nexus, who helped us kind of finalize a lot of the framework and sort of our comms plan around it. Next slide. And so what issue areas does LCJF include? Here you can see, there it is. So the website is lcjf.greenlatinos.org. That's what the framework looks like. And it's all covered in 3 chapters, and there's 13 subsections underneath the 3 chapters. And it ranges from pathway to energy, environmental economic justice, protecting vulnerable communities from the climate crisis, and then providing equitable access and representation. And so it really covers everything from improving our transportation and electrical grid to cleaning up thousands of abandoned oil wells posing risks to our communities, to boosting community resilience, and to everything from comprehensive immigration reform and increasing access to funding priorities. Next slide. So today I'm really gonna dive into chapter 1 because of time constraints, and because a lot of the issues covered in chapter 1 pertain to climate and clean air and oil and gas. And so chapter 1 is the chapter around creating a path to energy, environmental, and economic justice. So it highlights the problems that legacy of extraction has produced for our comunidades, and focuses on solutions that will facilitate a fossil fuel phase out and a just transition towards a clean energy, zero emissions future. And you can see on the right those subsections that are encompassed in that chapter, and we'll go into the first subsection. Next slide. So advancing clean, renewable, community-based energy. The problem around here is that we know that Latina households pay disproportionately high energy costs. Latinos are overrepresented among people living in poverty. The average low-income households spend 8.6% of their income on electricity compared to 3% of average non-low-income American households. So the energy burden is quite disproportionate. And alongside that, there is a need for our communities to have more pathways to sort of clean energy jobs in the clean energy transition. And so in this subsection, we have a variety of solutions, including investing with justice in clean energy. So that means not looking at just large scale renewable energy, but community-based programs, accelerating the transition to renewable energy on an accelerated timeline, and advancing economic equity and opportunities for Latina workers. And our goal here is around modernizing our electric grid and equitably advancing clean, affordable, renewable energy through investments in community-based energy programs, such as community solar and other opportunities for our workers. Next slide. So our next subsection in this chapter is around advancing clean mobility, transportation, and shipping. And so the problem statements around here are around, we know Latina workers and families rely heavily on public transport. According to recent data, Latinos commute by public transport significantly more than white counterparts. We know that there's a variety of pollution sources, including coming from school buses that endanger our children's health. We know Latino communities are especially vulnerable to other sources of pollution like trucks because of where the majority of our communities live and work. And Latinos are disproportionately living near ports and rail yards. So around here, we have a variety of different solution proposals, prioritizing livability of neighborhoods by building safe, accessible public transportation options where they are lacking, accelerating zero-emission transportation deployment in an equitable manner, and then accelerating development of zero-emission ports. So our goal in this subsection is to accelerate zero-emission transportation, freight movement, ports, and public transit, and advance affordable EV purchasing and comprehensive EV charging infrastructure in low-income communities. Next slide. So our next subsection is around reducing fossil fuel pollution and sacrifice zones. And here we really listed and identified some of the problem statements around recent analysis demonstrating an overlap of high density oil and gas operations near communities of color and people living below the poverty line. We know that Latinos, particularly children, disproportionately suffer from poor air quality caused by fossil fuels. For example, in California, 44% of Latino communities have poor air quality that's contributed by the incredible amounts of industry, including fossil fuel extraction, in comparison to 25% of non-Latino communities. And so here our goal statement is really around protecting our comunidades from pollution generated by oil and gas. We call for a complete phase out of fossil fuels and reducing the existing pollution for existing operations through a variety of different rulemakings at the local, state, and federal level. Next slide. Okay, and this is our final subsection for chapter 1, and this one is sort of an expansion of the previous one, but it's around plugging and remediating abandoned oil wells. And so we know that there's a huge problem from coast to coast. There are about 3 million abandoned wells, and according to the EPA, roughly 2 million may be considered unplugged or not properly sealed, so leaking air and also impacting water quality. And states with the highest concentrations of Latino populations have some of the most abandoned wells. And so here our goal is around remediating environmental hazards from orphan and abandoned oil and gas wells. There's a lot being done now through some of the funding from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the Interior Department has allocated some funds for the state. So some of our solution statements are just really around pushing that funding and ensuring that there's enough funds at the state level to be able to have comprehensive programs for remediating these improperly plugged abandoned oil wells. Next slide, please. So chapter 2, I will just kind of go through this a little bit more high level, but this chapter is addresses the risks associated with the climate crisis that are unique to our comunidades, such as climate migration and a climate resilient infrastructure. So our subsections here are everything from building climate resilient communities, providing equitable access to clean water, protections for farm workers, and then climate displacement and migration issues. And then chapter 3, next slide, please, covers providing equitable access and representation. So here we're talking about the problems and potential solutions for providing inclusivity, access, and funding to our comunidades, which are critical for righting the systemic wrongs of environmental injustice. So this includes increasing language access pathways, making equitable funding decisions, ensuring that there's proper stewardship of our natural world and heritage sites, representation for Puerto Rico, and then removing barriers to immigration and citizenship. So that is a lot of information, I know, and there's a lot more in there to unpack. This was just meant to give you a bit of a content overview, especially a deeper dive into chapter 1, but we're really would love and encourage everyone to go to lcjf.greenlatinos.org, really check out the framework, and once you review it, we're asking folks to become signatories and to endorse the framework. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, you can become a signatory of LCJF. And then we also have an option to retweet and to share it with your social media networks. I think the more we can get the word out of this, we can put additional pressure to our decision makers and really help make this a usable tool for everyone. Next slide. And then I also just wanted to uplift that we have the LCJF in Spanish. It's called the Marco de Justicia Climática Latina. And also we have it completely, it's bilingual. So there's also an option to uplift the MJCL on your social media networks as well and share with your Spanish speaking audiences. Next slide, please. And so you can see here, share, you can take a photo of the QR code, share it easily that way. We tried to make it as easily accessible for people as possible. And I also just wanted to point out that the LCJF was a huge endeavor to cover a wide range of issues. It certainly does not cover everything. We don't have a magic pill for everything at all. This was just a variety of issues that our communities came together and identified as priorities at the moment. But there's so much more that it could do, that it could cover. And we really see the LCJF as a living, breathing, growing document. So by all means, if you have feedback, if you have questions, if you have ways for us to build on this and improve it, please send them our way. And this is really a tool for all of us. Next slide. Okay, well, let me go back to the previous slide, if you can. Editor, I don't know if that's possible, might be kind of hard. But I just wanted to kind of take a beat. I know that was a lot, and see if there were any kind of questions to answer. I have not been looking at the chat, so I don't know, Dharma, if there's any in there to uplift, but maybe we can spend the next like 3 minutes or so if there are any questions, and if not, we can move on.
Irene, I'm happy to uplift some of them in the chat that have come in. I did answer them in the chat, but for anyone who might not have access to the chat at the moment, I think it'd be good to uplift here as well. So the first one that I see here is, can you become a signatory if you represent yourself, not an organization? And that's from Peggy.
That's a great question, Peggy. Right now, when you're guided through the signatory form, it does make you check if you are part of an organizational affiliation, but we are working to integrate individual sign-ons soon in the back end. So to answer your question, not at the moment, but coming soon.
And then the second question is on energy burden. And Christina asked if we have any studies with energy burden that we can refer to.
I believe that we do. I don't know them off the top of my head, but we have them in the LCJF. And Christina, I'm happy to let's follow up with you on that one, if you don't mind dropping your email. And we can follow up with you on those data points. And just so everyone's all the data points should be linked directly in the LCJF. Yes, we will follow up with you, Christina. Beautiful. Oh, Paola Garcia.
Gracias, Irene. So my question is there a deadline on when you want to have signatories for the document?
So that's a great question. We don't have a deadline right now. We are just gathering. This is, like I said, kind of like a living, breathing document that we just launched in October. I think a deadline will be, we will potentially do something with LCJF for the next Hispanic Heritage Month, which is September, October 2022. So I would say that there's time right now. There's time to just share it, get it out there, like give us feedback, kind of work through stuff. And then, so I would say that now is the moment to kind of share it with your networks and get folks to endorse the LCJF. And then around probably summer of next year, that's when we'll start gathering the endorsers that we have and think about the next kind of iteration of LCJF.
So I have a follow-up question. The ones that are listed in the webpage as inaugural partners can be described as the groups that put together this document?
Yes, they can be described as the groups that came together identifying the need for the Latina-focused climate framework and that put together the initial concept. And they were consulted all through the process to the very end.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, by the way, because you were a great reviewer of LCJF too. So. Okay, fabulous. So I know we have a lot more to dive into. So Eder, if you don't mind putting back up the slides and we'll go into the next.
Oh, it looks like we have one more question from Maritza.
Oh, sure, Maritza, or Dharma, if you want to read it off.
Oh, sorry. I saw that the hand was raised, but I think it went back down. Never mind.
Okay. So we wanted to kind of move on with our agenda. Thank you all for listening to that. I know it was a lot and appreciate everyone's support and kind words. So I want to just kind of give a little bit of an overview of COP27 since we haven't met in a few months and tell you a little bit of the wins and also the challenges I think that came out of this event. This was, so for those of you who who also attended, please feel free to drop in the chat your thoughts. Our CEO, Mark Magana, and myself attended COP27. I think the big focus of us and a gap that we did see identified in COP27 was around, oh, Dharma, do you have something?
Yes, I'm sorry. I did miss a question from Maritza. It's in the chat. If we want to jump to it really quick before continuing into COP27.
Sure.
Maritza says, thank you for sharing the framework. They're curious if there has been any engagement with Northern Indigenous tribes to strengthen the plans to promote and stewardship as outlined in your plan. That
is a great flag. I think we have done some outreach with a couple Indigenous groups. But Maritza, if you have specific groups in mind, and I can pull up like the list and give you a little bit more details on like who we conducted outreach to. I think that would be great to kind of brainstorm and maybe a good idea for a separate kind of conversation and briefing. So sorry, that wasn't very satisfying, but I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head. Okay. So one thing that stood out, and I'll start with the good. I guess I will start with the good of COP27. COP27 was a very interesting experience for me. It was my first time ever attending. There was a lot happening, a lot of moving pieces. And I think that one big win that happened, and this is coming off of years of advocacy from the climate community and from a lot of frontline communities too, and developing nations, was the creation of a loss and damages fund. So this means that this is around a point of advocacy to for more developed nations who have contributed the bulk of our carbon emissions and have contributed the most to the climate crisis, having impacted most severely a lot of the island states, developing nations that are left with managing the bulk of the climate crisis and finding ways to adapt with the least amount of resources. And so the loss and damages point of advocacy has been incredibly important in terms of international equity and advancing just justice in terms of the balance between the North and the South globally. And so it was a whirlwind. Loss and damages wasn't even on the agenda initially. And then by the end of the 2 weeks at COP27, there was the development of a fund. How we know that's going to work exactly, we don't know all the details, but developing nations did commit to putting in a certain amount of funds to support developing nations. So that was a big win. Another highlight from COP27 was around methane. We know that there were more global commitments around pledges around reducing methane emissions, including from US and China. President Biden announced the EPA methane rule, which we will go more into during COP27. So that was also like something that was, a highlight of the 2 weeks. Room for progress. There was a lack of space for direct actions in this COP27, which means there just wasn't a lot of room for frontline advocacy to kind of have banners and provide direct actions, which is a really important part of COP27, to kind of let our decision makers know how communities are feeling and what the advocacy is. Their climate finance is also just overall a topic that's been punted to next COP28. Net zero has been problematic. The framing around a lot of COP text around net zero, because it's included offsets, which is problematic in many ways. And then there was a lack of focus on fossil fuel mitigation. This was a really big disappointment for us at GreenLatinos, and something that we definitely want to push for in the next COP. And then I would just lastly say there's just a greater need for Latina representation. You know, GreenLatinos was one of the only like US-based Latina groups represented in COP27, and it was just 2 of us. So, you know, there's just a lot more that needs to be done for our representation to be up there. Okay, next slide. All right, and then sort of a segue into this, we wanted to update y'all on, I'm sure everyone's been hearing and involved in different ways on the Senator Manchin's dirty side deal. So, and just to give a little bit of context, there's more flaring up today. As part of the IRA negotiations, we know that there's been some backdoor dealing with permitting reform that would essentially weaken NEPA, which is a bedrock environmental law that allows our communities to participate comprehensively in rulemakings, as well as and sort of the weakening of NEPA would would allow much easier green lighting of pipeline projects, gas pipelines such as the Mountain Valley Pipeline. And so this is something that EJ activists and frontline orgs have worked tirelessly on to successfully block this reform. We've already done it twice last week. We did it earlier in the fall. And so today, again, it's come up. It looks like there's going to be Schumer will try to introduce the permitting reform legislation again in the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. And so we're asking folks to take some time to, like, you know, really reach out to senators. And here we have a list of target senators that we're targeting. And it's really our progressive Dem senators to block and vote no on this again. It's really, really critical. And, you know, our community has come together on this before and stopped it before. So I think we can do it again. So this was just an important opportunity. And I know we have just tweeted out about it today, so we can drop our tweet in there if anyone wants to kind of retweet or quote tweet. Okay, next slide. And I think this one goes to Dharma. I'll pass it over to Dharma.
Yeah, that's me. Thank you, Irene. So yeah, a lot of opportunities for action coming up. I mean, I think my first instinct is it's the end of the year, things are closing down, but it's quite opposite. We have a lot of regulatory movement happening right now in the EPA and in other agencies. We're fighting the dirty side deal, also known as the zombie deal, because it keeps coming up in the legislative space. So there's a lot of actions that us as members can take to really make our voices heard and make sure we make our agency rules as strong as possible and block dangerous legislation like the dirty side deal. So right now, we're going to be talking about the EPA's new methane rule. So this is a long-awaited rule. It's been years in the making at this point. And last week, the EPA released this long-awaited, anticipated rule proposal to cut methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. So that's the purpose of the rule. It dives a lot into different monitoring approaches, different technology approaches, how communities can play a role in cutting methane emissions as well. And so it's a really comprehensive rule, and the public comment period for this rule is now open, and we really want to make sure that our voices are heard. I think it goes without saying, methane is an extremely strong climate warmer, significantly impacting global temperatures in the short term, which increases dangerous weather events, climate exacerbated natural disasters. And when we also think about who lives near these oil and gas facilities, we have documented about 1.6 million Latinx people live within half a mile of an active oil and gas well or facility. So it's really important that we make this rule that will be aimed to cut methane emissions as strong as we possibly can, and share our stories and share why this rule is so important to our communities. So right now, the public comment period is open. It closes on February 13th. And there will also be, as well as written comments, there will be an opportunity for oral testimony and to share our stories that way. And those hearings will take place on January 10th, 11th, and 12th. They actually just added the new date on the 12th because the first 2 days got filled up so quickly within like 48 hours of putting the registration forms online. So that's showing that we're really coming out, we're really showing out, so much so that they literally needed to add it a third day. So it takes 1 minute to register to present oral testimony. And we really encourage anyone of all ages, all backgrounds, all professions to sign up and to register and to share their story. GreenLatinos will be providing a lot of resources and assistance to craft oral remarks to make them as strong as possible and to make sure folks are feeling as comfortable as they can be presenting oral testimony, such as sample testimony script, trainings, and all that fun stuff. So we'll have lots of resources to share, and we're fully committed to working with folks to get those oral testimonies ready to go. And Irene dropped in the chat the link to register for oral testimony. Again, it takes 1 minute. It's like through Eventbrite, so a really easy platform. So thank you, EPA, for that. And there are a lot of slots taken up, but if you are interested in speaking and you don't see a time slot that fits for you, if that's filled up, please let us know, because we do have a roster of other partner organizations and other people that are speaking, and we can make sure that we can get you a time slot that you need. So please don't let that be a limiting factor if you don't see an exact time slot that works for you. We can make something work in that regard. So I'd like to pause and see if anyone has any questions. And if not, we can move forward to the next slide, but definitely want to take a moment to pause and see if folks have any questions about the EPA methane rule.
Yes, and if anyone also has any anything to add on this, on the dirty side deal, or on COP. There's a question about, it's from Peggy, can we send written testimony? Dharma, if you want to.
Yes, thank you, Danae. Yes, Peggy, we can send written testimony in. We do have resources for that as well, so we can connect with you afterwards to send you those details. Similar to oral testimony, we have a sample comment that you can tweak and edit around to fit your words and your narrative, and we have more resources as well. So I'm happy to send those your way if you'd like to submit a written comment.
Peggy, if you drop your, if you message me or Dharma with your email address, we can send you that.
Also, I see from Irma that they've deactivated their Twitter account. Are there any other channels Green Latino uses where they can share and amplify these messages? For the methane, okay, got it. For the methane rule, we do post different stories and posts on our Instagram and also on our Facebook, so we're active there. So I'm also happy to share those links and those posts for these issue areas as well. Perfect.
Thank you. I think we can probably move on to the next agenda item.
Beautiful. So I'm going to pass it over to Paul to talk about waste incineration and its impact on our communities. So Paul, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Pinasendio Cuesta, coming from New Rochelle, New York. I am one of the co-chairs of this wonderful working group for climate justice and clean air, alongside with Didi Balmares, who's the climate justice organizer for Public Citizen, and superstar Paula Garcia, who is a senior energy analyst and an energy justice lead for the Union of Concerned Scientists. So basically just talking about waste incineration, because it is a huge issue impacting communities of color, especially where members of the Latino community are strongly represented. Waste incineration is starting to pick up. It has been picking up because of obviously urban migration. And also as we see population growth, we're also seeing a growth of the number of items entering into our solid waste streams. So as you see here, I didn't want to kind of read everything verbatim, but I did, mention how, waste incinerators are being adopted in areas because people are kind of seeing that as opposed to having these massive landfills, it's better to incinerate these items and transport the ash while having, some sort of waste to energy transition energy production. But at the same time, there is an overlooked environmental impact, especially on the air quality of communities that are in proximity to the incineration plants. And incinerations are regarded as a huge environmental issue because of the long-standing issues and the compromising of our human physiology. If we'll go to the next slide. So I was woken up to this because of the waste incineration plant called Wheelabrator that is here in Westchester County, New York. It is located in the city of Peekskill, that is over 42% Latino, and was opened in 1984 as a county-owned contract. So right now, this incineration plant is putting over, from our last emissions data that we received from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, has put over 587 million pounds of CO2 and hazardous materials into our air. And this includes so much compounds that you could Google search and see the environmental impact. This is sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, cadmium, mercury, hydrogen chlorides, oxides of nitrogen. These are things that really people should not be breathing. And we're right now looking into a dynamic public education campaign to let residents know about this waste incineration plant, its impact on communities of color, and also how this could be offset when the contract for the waste incineration plant is up for renewal in 8 years. So right now, the waste incineration plant in Peekskill treats all of the solid waste that is going all throughout Westchester County. This includes some of the most affluent communities in Westchester, such as Scarsdale, Eastchester, Pelham, Bedford, and Chappaqua. And this is something that really needs to be addressed. Otherwise, it's going to create a negative feedback loop that's going to really compromise people, their human physiology, and have them have respiratory related diseases, or honestly be on a pathway towards having diseases such as cancer. Next slide. So what could we do? Obviously, there's a ton of materials that's out there in zero waste programming, making sure that people know about how they could be better stewards of knowing what to use, what not to use. A lot of people say reduce, reuse, recycle, but also think about the fourth R, which is refuse. And I know sustainability is really deeply embedded in our Latino heritage, not because of an aesthetic, but honestly as a way of survival, especially through an economic lens. So, making sure that people are aware about this, and also being over there to help be proactive when we see information about zero waste programming, to be having that forward-thinking leadership of helping with the linguistic equity and translating these documents to make sure that we get the information out there. Also partnering with organizations that I've been partnering with that's helping us in Westchester, such as the Energy Justice Network, which has been helping with shutting down incinerators through a public education for the alternatives through sustainable practices. And also the Energy Justice Network, this is what I shared with Irene, they currently right now have a sign-on letter that is going to the White House Council on Environmental Quality, which is urging the EPA to strengthen their standards for waste incineration, closing the loopholes that currently enable incinerations. And this will also encourage those plants to be close and also stop promoting waste burning. This is something that's really is bad. It's compromising our air, and it's really important that we, I guess, as an organization or as a working group, look at how we could facilitate, getting this information out there for solutions. Maybe a future event. I'm really open to any ideas, and we can all work on it together. But I just know that this is a problem that really is impacting people, and honestly, the people in the community of Peekskill, and it might be similar to other communities of color, may not have the socioeconomic bandwidth to be the forward-thinking leaders to be able to help resolve this. So it's really important that we all come together across state lines, across municipal lines, to really work together to help present a solution through public education. Because if we educate the public, then people are equipped with the information that they bring to their local legislators, and then up the other hierarchies of government to make sure that we are having sound environmental justice policy and overall equity for our communities. And also, we can share the survey, the sign-on letter. Irina has it, so we could look at it and see if we could pledge our support.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, and if you have anything to drop in the chat right now, Paul, for our members to sign on to, I think that would be awesome. And I just wanted to open it up for like a couple minutes to see if there were any questions for Paul before we turn it over to member updates.
All right, let me know. And obviously, I'm one of the co-chairs for this working group, so feel free to contact us anytime. Como ustedes ya saben, la unidad está la fuerza, so we're all in this together. That's we got to do it.
Yes. Thank you, Paul. Okay, turning it over to Dharma.
Thanks, Irene, and thanks, Paul, for your presentation. That was super interesting. I've never heard of the fourth R, so you learn something new every day. So I really appreciated that point and everything else that you shared. Really interested in learning more on this issue and getting plugged in action-wise. I do want to turn over to member announcements and see if there are anything that anyone would like to share and uplift. This is a space where we really want to hear about what people are up to, fights that are happening on the ground, anything that our fellow members can plug into. For example, Paul plugged the sign-on letter and talked about waste incineration. So anything that folks are interested in or have ideas about for the future, please let us know here and we can have some dialogue about it. So I'll pause and see if anyone has items that they want to mention. And you can also drop it in the chat. That works too.
Hi.
Hi, Maritza. Oh, that might.
Okay. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I apologize. I don't have my screen on. I'm recovering from COVID, but I felt it was really important to listen to this framework that you're sharing. I think it's a really important framework. I work with Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous People. I am of Mexican descent, but I work with mainly California tribes for environmental justice. It's an environmental justice organization founded and led by local California tribes. I think what's really important, and I felt important to share here, is the best practices that I feel would push a lot of the common experiences and realities that the Latino population and the Northern Indigenous population have been experiencing. And whether it's in caucuses or whether it's in collectives or coalitions, we're always about reminding folks about connecting with local Indigenous peoples on any project, simply because we're either repeating what colonial systems have been set up to do, no matter if it's Black, brown, or Asian. And so we want to break from those systems by reminding each other of really reaching out and partnering with local Indigenous folks. One example is where I heard, this was the first time I heard of GreenLatinos, was at the US Water Alliance Summit that took place in August. And it was there where there were some great water projects happening, and there was involvement of the local working class Mexicano community in deconcretizing the Kinnickinnic River, which is a whole chunk tribal territory lands. And it was a great project, successful, but they never ever involved the local Indigenous tribes. And we mean when you get them involved, not just to open up or provide a land acknowledgement or to open up in a ceremonial way, but to really get them involved from inception to implementation to remediation. I think we're going to be far more effective. And as you know, for those who went to COP27, or those who have gone to the United Nations, as I've gone to many times, it really is an urgent situation that we're living in. And partnerships are dire in order for us to really deal with the reality of the climate crisis we're all undergoing. So I just want to simply remind you and everyone about the best practices of reaching out to Indigenous local folks and partnering, especially when it comes to stewarding the lands. That's it. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen.
Thank you so much, Maritza, for sharing. And I think we can all get behind what you shared. It's very meaningful. And I'll turn it over to Alex as well.
I want to uplift Maritza's words and also chime in with something we're leading in Connecticut. For those who don't know me, I'm Alex Rodriguez. I work with an organization called Save the Sound, based in New Haven, Connecticut, and also Larchmont, New York. And we are, in recent years, we've really been inspired by a law that New Jersey passed regarding their environmental justice statutes. They have strengthened their law to take into consideration the disproportionate environmental and public health impacts of pollution on BIPOC communities. And so we're aiming to do something similar in Connecticut, build on our existing environmental justice statutes, because when the host of an affecting facility, such as a power plant or a waste incinerator, when they are looking to expand their operations or renew operations, they have to go through an intensive permitting review process by the state's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And so we're advocating for the state's Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the Siting Council to take into account cumulative impacts, really gauging the amount of affecting facilities that are already situated in Black and Latinx communities, and prevent the siting of new facilities and prevent the siting to prevent the renewal of affecting facilities in already environmentally distressed communities. We see that as a big intersection with environment, public health, and climate. And so we are circulating a Cylon letter as well. And I can share that if folks would like.
Yes, please drop it in the chat. And also for, I'll jump to Irma in a second. Wanted to note that we also do newsletters, and we have a Google group listserv that our Colectivo members can use to promote items and actions like this in real time. So we don't have to wait for an Encuentro to share what we're working on. So just want to uplift that as well. And we can have those details in a follow-up email. But yes, Irma?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask this group, one of the areas that I'm particularly working on in terms of, and it intersects climate justice and equitable economic opportunities, and just the textile and garment industry. And I'm wondering if anybody here is working on, works, with textiles, with clothing, both from a cultural perspective, like our heritage, because there's so many incredible art forms that we are losing as everybody transitions to fast fashion, but also in terms of justice around access to better clothes. I mean, and that goes to zero waste, because we're just throwing them away. And often that's the only, the only options in vulnerable communities are, really cheap clothing. And then we have this impact of we tend to ship all our excess clothing overseas. We just kind of dump it in other nations. So I'm wondering if anybody is working in that area. I'm interested in collaborating with people, just kind of examining this, these whole topics that relate to the other thing I was going to say was, like, when we talk about fossil fuels, one of the byproducts of that petroleum industry are those synthetic fabrics, again, that are most of our clothes. So again, it goes back that, it's not just like we think of fossil fuels as what homes or what goes in it. There's all kinds of other ways that we could reduce fossil fuel usage in our society and get back to our indigenous ways, our heritage, and that it kind of affects every industry. So
Okay, so
so if anybody's interested in reaching out, I'll put my email in the chat. I would love to hear from anybody. Thank you.
perfect. Thank you, Irma. Yes, I think that's great. Put your email in the chat. I know that we're a minute out. So I just wanted to say, while Irma's doing that, so if anyone has, I think that's a very important topic, actually, around textiles. If anyone has any other links or anything, drop them in. Dharma and I will send out a follow-up email just with kind of some recap to-dos and anything that people have shared. Thank you all so much. This has been just such a great, I just appreciate everyone's activeness, enthusiasm, and for sharing your space and time with us. And also just happy early holidays. I know it feels like it's been really busy, actually, and there's a lot going on in the world, but I hope everyone takes some time for themselves and to just kind of reflect and give yourself a big kudos for all the work that you've done in 2022, and we certainly appreciate it. So thank you all so much. I know we're at time. I'm gonna close it out. Appreciate y'all. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, y'all.